Episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today I interview Alice from the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. She is the policy advisor at this organization and is trained as a lawyer from Italy.
Welcome, Alice. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast here.
Thank you. Thank you, Anish. And honestly, thank you on behalf of the entire Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime for your podcast. I think it's a great platform to discuss conservation issues and projects. And I recently listened to an episode that you did with Ian Redmond, one of our good colleagues from Rebalance Earth, and I found that very interesting. So again, a personal thank you for the work that you're doing. I imagine it's taken a lot of time and energy. So congrats on that.
Right, thank you so much for your kind words. So my first question for you is that how much is wildlife crime worth globally?
Yeah, so obviously being an illicit industry, it's very hard to come up with exact estimates, but we know that it is one of the biggest illegal activities worldwide. Some say that it's the fourth behind only arms, drugs, and human trafficking. But regardless of whether it's the fourth, fifth, or sixth, there's a little bit of controversy around that. We know that it is growing and it is increasingly concerning. UNEP and Interpol estimate the illegal wildlife trade, so just wildlife not including illegal logging and fishing, to be between 7 and 23 billion US dollars. And obviously, again, when you do include illegal logging and fishing, that now really rises exponentially.
Beyond driving species laws, what are some broader ecological, social, and economic implications of the illegal wildlife trade?
Yes, so obviously species loss is the most obvious, right? Because we know from recent reports that the IPBES has estimated that over 1 million species are currently at risk of extinction in the coming decades, and many within just a few decades if we don't rapidly change course. And there are some of the most recent examples. Let's just think about the northern white rhino after the death of Sudan, as I'm sure you're aware of. In 2019, there's only 2 female northern white rhinos left. And that's unfortunate consequence of poaching and the illegal wildlife trade. And then obviously thinking of species that are not extinct yet, but on the road to extinction, unfortunately, there's the vaquita. We have about 10 left. The numbers are uncertain there as well. So species lost is unfortunately one of the most obvious ones, but then it's not the only one. At the ecological level, obviously there's the matter of ecosystem imbalance, because when you remove key species from their habitats, it can affect all other species by causing, for example, overpopulation of certain prey species, and then as a result, overgrazing. So ecosystem imbalance is another one. And last but not least, on the ecological impact, is the introduction of non-native, potentially invasive species, right, that can further disrupt ecosystem. And that's also sometimes an unintended result of the legal wildlife trade, because many times people will buy exotic pets and release them in the wild without realizing that they are causing the introduction of a potentially invasive species. And another significant consequence is on human and animal health. And this is, again, one of the other objectives of the global initiative, because we know that the illegal wildlife trade in particular, but again, there are some concerns about the legal trade as well, brings humans and wildlife into close, unnatural, unmonitored contact. It bypasses veterinary protocols and biosecurity controls, and it increases the risk of zoonotic disease emergence. And this is especially true when you think about species that are considered to be high risk species. There's some good scientific evidence regarding how bats, rodents, and primates are particularly high risk, and should be, we should be particularly mindful of those species. And then another big category that I would describe when it comes to impact of wildlife trafficking is the social and economic impact, because you can't obviously ignore the fact that when you exploit certain species and drive them to the verge of extinction, then the communities that have historically benefited from the sustainable and legal use of those species will no longer be able to do so. And on top of that, obviously, there are economic opportunities like the ones linked to wildlife tourism and other legal activities. So plenty of unfortunately unintended and dangerous consequences. Oh, and I was about to forget, but obviously there are security concerns as well, because wildlife trafficking is often linked to organized crime, and the revenue of wildlife trafficking can then be channeled into illegal activities and can fund criminal networks. So again, the list is long, and I feel like I've only really mentioned the main ones.
Thanks for that. So you mentioned a global initiative to end wildlife crime. So what is the idea behind this?
Yes, so the global initiative, which I joined in early 2021, was created in June 2020. So during the pandemic, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was only just 2-3 years ago. And it was launched, it's chaired by the former Secretary General of CITES, so John Scallon, who I hope you'll have the opportunity to chat with soon. And it's hosted by an NGO, a Hong Kong-based NGO called ADM Capital Foundation. They are our hosts, and we're very grateful for all the support that they have provided us through the years. And we're also supported by 32 international champions. So these are private sector representatives, other NGOs, industry associations that are committed to advancing our objectives in using their sphere of influence. And the initiative was created to address 2 legal reforms that we thought were needed in the international law. The first, and probably the one that you're most familiar with and we're probably better known for, is the adoption of a global agreement to tackle wildlife trafficking. And our idea has always been that should be an additional protocol to the UNTOC. The UNTOC is the main international instrument to tackle transnational organized crime. And the idea is to add a protocol to the 3 existing protocols on human trafficking, migrant smuggling, and firearms manufacturing and trafficking. And starting from 2021, I believe May 2021, a number of countries and a number of presidents have made very powerful statements in support of an additional protocol to the UNTOC. So Gabon and Costa Rica, followed by Angola, Malawi, and more recently, the European Commission has also expressed a level of support for a global agreement of this kind, because in the action plan of last year, again, not sure everyone is familiar with that, but in November 2022, the European Commission released their revised action plan to tackle wildlife trafficking. And in that document, in that action plan, there's a reference to there's a commitment for the EU to promote an additional protocol to the UNTOC covering wildlife trafficking. And then finally, the most recent expression of support was from the American Bar Association in February of this year. So this is our first pillar, our first objective. And the second one is the inclusion, and again, coming from the era of COVID-19 and really this awakening that people have had regarding the dangers of epidemics and pandemics. The second pillar, the second objective, is the inclusion of public and animal health criteria in international processes and conventions. And this second one is a bit trickier because we initially wanted to, and we initially proposed a number of amendments to CITES, CITES being the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, the main international instrument to regulate trade in wild animals and plants at the international level. And again, the idea initially was to amend that convention to include public and animal health criteria in the decision-making processes of the convention. But we have since moved on from that approach for a couple of reasons. One being that there wasn't enough buy-in from state parties, and another that other members of the civil society, so fellow NGOs, fellow organizations, were concerned that opening up the convention to renegotiations might lead to some unintended changes in the convention. So we have since moved on from that approach, and we're now focusing on the so-called pandemic instrument, which is an international instrument on the prevention, preparedness, and response to future outbreaks. That's being negotiated under the auspices of the WHO. So we're focusing on that instrument, and we're trying our best to contribute to those negotiations to ensure that there's a strong focus on preventing pandemics at the source, and to ensure that the instrument addresses thoroughly the risks of illegal and legal wildlife trade when it comes to animal health and public health risks. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's always tough to summarize really our two objectives in just a few words.
So what have been some of the biggest challenges while tackling a lot of these legal frameworks around illegal wildlife trade?
Yes, so we haven't, especially with the global agreement to tackle wildlife trafficking, I have to say we haven't encountered any strong resistance from member states. In fact, recently, in May of 2020, the CE released a report summarizing some of the member states' views on this protocol. So they were asked, what are your views on the potential of an additional protocol to the UNTOC covering wildlife trafficking? So this global agreement that we've been talking about. And over half of the responding states were supportive of this approach. So we haven't necessarily found a lot of resistance from member states, but there are surely some countries and some governments that would prefer a different approach. It's a minority, but there are some member states that would prefer to focus on fully implementing the instruments that are already available. And then there are other member states that would prefer to have a global agreement tackling all environmental crime. So not just wildlife trafficking, but other environmental crimes such as illegal mining, waste trafficking, and so on. So again, not a whole lot of resistance, but I would say the main challenge is that reforming international law is always a painfully long process. And the implementation at the national level is just as long. And so we are aware of that, and we know that we're sort of playing the a long-term game in that sense. But we think that this is a very necessary reform.
What do you think is the way forward for the global initiative to end wildlife crime? What are you guys working on in the next couple of years?
Well, we will continue to support member states that have called for a global agreement to tackle wildlife trafficking. By the end of this year, the UNODC should release a report, an updated report that summarizes member states' views on the potential of a global agreement. So we're really looking forward to that. The first report, again, in May of 2023, was a hopeful one, and it gave us, a reason to keep up the good fight, as you would say. And we're looking forward to the next one to seeing how the momentum continues to hopefully grow. We're also working, as I mentioned, on the pandemic instrument. And as you may know, the idea is that negotiations for that instrument should end by June of 2024. And for us, the priority there is really to make sure that the instrument is as focused as possible on prevention, because the current draft unfortunately focuses mostly on post-outbreak actions. So what do you do after an outbreak? And we want the instrument to focus on preventing pandemics at the source, and do its best to minimize the risk of spillovers. And we've offered a number of suggestions to member states in that regard. So we want the instrument to address the role of the wildlife trade, both legal and illegal, as well as live animal markets, in the emergence of zoonotic diseases. And we suggest that that's done by committing member states to place much tougher regulations on the taking, the trading, the selling, the consumption of wild animals, especially high risk animals. I mentioned some of for bats, rodents, following scientific evidence on that. And we also suggested that the instrument supports the transition away from high risk activities to support alternative livelihoods. We're also supporters of what has now become known as the One Health approach. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with it. And it's a simple but very powerful concept, which is that the health of humans, animals, and the environment that they live in are linked, right? And so it's essential to understand that problems in one of these areas. So really vocal in our support for a One Health approach. And again, just to summarize some of the other projects and some of the things that are going to happen for us, we're also engaging in the negotiations of the new Council of Europe Convention on the protection of the environment through criminal law. And we're also implementing a very exciting project on zoonotic disease prevention in relation to wildlife trade in Angola, Botswana, and Zambia. And this is a project that's kindly funded by JZ through the International Alliance Against Health Risks in Wildlife Trade. So we do have a few exciting things happening in the coming months and years.
Moving on to your own career. So you have worked with various organizations before joining the initiative. So one of the projects you supported was the implementation of the EU-funded SWIPE project. Could you just elaborate a bit about this?
Sure. So the SWIPE project is funded by the EU. It's called Life Swipe, and it's on the successful prosecution of wildlife crimes in Europe. And I was lucky enough, and this is completely disconnected from my work from the global initiative, but I was asked to support the implementation of this project in my home country, Italy. I'm originally from Venice, so and I have an Italian law degree, so that was an exciting project for me. And so the project focuses on training prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement in the field of wildlife crime. And as you know, it's, the specific training for these categories is incredibly important. But another thing that I think is just as important is bringing them together in the same room and building those connections and building that trust. So that's what happened in, I believe, April of this year. It must have been April. So we had the Swipe project summit at the Italian level. So the first workshop of the Swipe project in Rome. And it was incredibly exciting because, my role was to help adapt the training material for prosecutor, law enforcement, and judges to the Italian context. So I personally, my contribution was taking the sort of international training material and adapting it to the Italian context, both by translating it, but also really adapting to the legal context of Italy. And in the context of that workshop that we hosted in April, it was really exciting to see, different departments of law enforcement come together, get to know each other for the first time, really build that trust that you need and those connections that you need to exchange information and ask for advice. Because unfortunately, in Italy and elsewhere, this is still a crime area that's not well known. And there's not a whole lot of resources that go into combating and preventing it. So yeah, that was the Swipe project, and I did that by supporting the legal team of WWF Italy, and again, a very exciting opportunity.
You also worked with Legal Atlas to produce a number of publications. So could you talk about some of your prominent work with Legal Atlas?
Yes, I'm very happy to talk about Legal Atlas anytime, because I think it's such a fantastic platform, and they do such great work. It was funded by Jim Wingard, who we continue to work with. I've worked for Legal Atlas in the past by supporting some of their legal research and analysis, but we are continuing to work with Legal Atlas as the global initiative to end wildlife crime, because we have a project in collaboration with Legal Atlas and another NGO called the ICCF group. And what that project is focusing on, and particularly what Legal Atlas is focusing on in the context of that project, is they are legal Botswana and Zambia, so in the Kaza region, and they are conducting so-called gap analysis to see how the national legislation can be improved to prevent and control future zoonotic outbreaks. And again, this is really complementary work to our second objective at the Global Initiative, our pandemic instrument objective. And yeah, Legal Atlas has noticed in previous research that unfortunately most national laws, when addressing, I don't want to say most because I don't actually know if it's most, but in many cases, national laws addressing zoonotic diseases mainly focus on livestock, not wildlife. And so that's what we're trying to change. And those are the gaps that we're trying to fill. And again, Legal Atlas is really unique in that sense, because it's a legal platform that collects and summarizes information and legislation from really all sorts of countries, from all regions, all over the world, and makes it publicly available on their platform. So I would really advise anyone who has an interest in the law to go and check out the Legal Atlas website.
So how can individuals contribute to tackling the illegal wildlife trade?
Yeah, well, this is probably the question that we get the most. And I find it challenging to give specific advice sometimes, because the illegal wildlife trade so often hides behind the legal trade, right? And so with species that are strictly protected, so species that are listed under Appendix 1 of CITES, so for example, pangolins, rhinos, etc., it's easier to tell people not to purchase or consume those products. So, for example, pangolin scales or rhino horns. That's an easier communication to do, because you can tell people to simply avoid those products. And coming from those particularly protected species, there are particularly endangered. But with other appendices, I don't think it's as easy. My best advice would be to, when purchasing, for example, exotic leathers or products made from exotic wildlife products in general, stick to what's certified and ask for the related documentation. So the CITES certificates, so that you know that what you're buying is legal. And same can be said for exotic pets, although I will say, and I say this in my personal capacity, has nothing to do with my role as at the global initiative, but the exotic pet trade can be incredibly concerning from an animal welfare perspective as well. And so again, at a very personal level, I would advise that whoever is interested in buying an exotic pet really thinks about that choice and ponders whether it's worth it, because there are animal welfare implications as well as concerns regarding where that animal could come from. Lastly, I would say support organizations that are fighting this battle, and we're certainly one of them, but there are many organizations out there, especially at the national level, that really tackle the country specific issues and country specific species. So there are really a number of organizations that are doing amazing work in that space, and I would suggest that you do your best to support them.
And my final question for this interview is that, what has been your biggest learning from your conservation career?
In my career in general?
Yeah.
Well, be patient. If you do have an interest in pursuing a career in wildlife conservation, it can be incredibly frustrating at the beginning, because there are few opportunities, lots of people that want those opportunities. And I think if this is really your passion and this is what you want to do moving forward, do your best to volunteer your time, add those extracurricular activities to your CV while you're studying at university, and really show that you're passionate about the topic and you're investing in the topic. And really, don't give up, because I have so many colleagues and friends in this field, especially young professionals. I'm 28 and I have many friends that are my similar ages, and it's been tough for many of us to get into this field, because again, it can be a bit tricky to access. But don't give up. I know that unfortunately doing a number of unpaid internships and volunteering positions can be really hard, and not everyone can do that realistically. So on one hand, I hope there'll be more opportunities for young professionals in the future, and on the other, I really advise that people interested in working in this space don't give up and continue to pursue those opportunities. And obviously, you're welcome to reach out to me over on LinkedIn or other social media. I'm always happy to chat with young people that are interested in pursuing a career in wildlife conservation.
Thank you so much for your time today. It was really a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Anish. And again, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'm really grateful for the platform that you've built, and I'll continue to listen to your future episodes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.